I will begin by calling the roll, and all 9 members of council are physically present here at City Hall. So we don't have anybody meeting with us remotely. And we will begin the meeting with I'll ask everybody to rise for a moment of silent prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Amen. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. First item on the agenda is a recognition of Arbor Day, a short proclamation, which I will read right now. Whereas trees are a precious natural resource that improve the appearance of our community, increase the value of property, moderate air temperature, lower energy costs, reduce soil erosion and storm water runoff, and produce life-giving oxygen. And whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. And whereas this special day, known as Arbor Day, is now celebrated throughout the nation and world. And whereas the state of North Carolina has determined that Arbor Day shall be celebrated annually on the first Friday following the 15th of March. And whereas the city of High Point has created an urban forestry program to conserve, protect, and maintain trees in city spaces. Now therefore, I, Jay Wagner, Mayor of the City of High Point, do hereby proclaim March 19th as Arbor Day for the City of High Point, and call upon all citizens of our city to participate in ceremonies and activities to preserve and enhance our community's urban forest for the benefit of all residents and visitors. So this Friday, we're planting a tree. Toward Arbor Day. You want to present? Yeah. And yes, Andy Piper, I think, is going to tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council members, Andy Piper is Senior Planner with the City of High Point Planning and Development Department. I'm also Chair of the High Point Urban Forestry Committee, and just wanted to talk briefly about High Point receiving its 17th Tree City USA designation for its efforts over the past year to plant and maintain trees. There are 4 criteria that you must meet to receive this award. You must have a public tree ordinance, a tree board, a community urban forestry program with annual expenditures of at least $2 per capita, and an annual Arbor Day observance and proclamation. Being recognized as Tree City USA means that we understand as a community that in addition to beautification, trees play an important practical role in the city. As you heard in the proclamation, there are many benefits, including increased property values that help contribute to the city's bottom line. But it takes responsible stewardship, and the city's Urban Forestry Committee oversees that with the implementation of our public tree ordinance and the guidelines and standard practices that apply to all property owners that are encouraged to follow. The committee also accomplishes its mission by working with local businesses and community groups to plant trees. For example, the Keep High Point Beautiful group has launched the Community Cultivation Campaign to raise private donations to replace several trees that have been lost along Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. We also planted 9 more trees through our Plant to Remember Memorial Tree Program, bringing to a total 96 trees since that program began in 2010. Later this spring, as the weather gets warmer and more people hopefully get vaccinated, we plan on holding a ceremony to honor National Arbor Day in late April. And we'll ask the community to join us at that time. But I also wanted to end this evening by acknowledging the efforts of the city's tree maintenance workers in the Parks and Recreation, Public Services, and Electric Services divisions during the pandemic this past year. As we all know, it's been a challenging year for those on the front lines, but is it essential to maintain the trees we have and those we plant in order to have a healthy tree canopy in the future? So I thank you for your taking time to listen to me.
Thank you, Mr. Piper. Excellent. A lot of good efforts in the city to keep our city beautiful and to plant trees. Next item on the agenda is the Finance Committee portion, and for that, I will turn the meeting over to Mayor Pro Tem Britt Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Wagner. Council, tonight, our entire agenda is on a consent agenda. The majority of this was dealing with our wastewater treatment plants and contract issues and one sale of a property. So I will make the motion that the consent agenda be approved.
Second, Holmes.
There's a motion. Who was the second? Mr. Holmes, was that you?
Yes.
There's a seconded by Mr. Holmes for approval of the consent agenda items. Is there any discussion on any of these? Okay, hearing none, I will call the roll. Councilman Holmes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilman Johnson?
Aye.
Councilwoman Peters?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Moore?
Aye.
Councilman Williams?
Aye.
Councilman Hudson?
Aye.
Councilman Jones?
Aye.
Councilman Jefferson?
Aye.
Mayor votes aye. So those items are approved by a vote of 9-0. I believe that's it for the Finance Committee.
Yes, thank
Unless
you.
you have anything else to report on?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. Next part of the agenda, there are no Prosperity and Livability Committee items. So the next thing on the agenda is the Community Development Committee items. And for that, I'll turn the meeting over to Councilmember Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. The first item up is 2021-100. It is the ordinance of demolition of dwelling 810 Willis Avenue. And for that, I will turn it over to Lori Loosemore. City staff.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. If y'all start the presentation. Tonight, the first case, 822 Hilltop. I think this is last month's presentation. Or last meeting's.
Lori, I'm sorry, I did say 810 Willis Avenue. Is
Oh,
that-
18 Wills is first. Okay, I apologize. But this is still the wrong presentation.
Okay.
Now my concern is I think I may have put the presentations in the wrong order. I'll just go ahead and start with 810 West Willis. We originally inspected it on January 31st, 2019. I'm not. Okay, I was just wanting to make sure that I don't think that's the right, but then I saw this says unsecured dwelling, so now I'm a little thrown off. Sorry. We originally inspected 810 West Willis on January 31st of 2019. The inspector found that it was unsecured. He held a hearing on March the 14th of 2019 that no one appeared for. We then issued an order to repair demolish on January 14th of 2020 with a compliance date of February 17th of 2020. We've not heard anything from any errors that was advertised in the paper. They are delinquent also in the amount of a little over $14,750 in property taxes from 2007 to 2020.
All right. Is there any questions for staff? All right. Madam Clerk, for the sake of the record, have we received any correspondence on this item?
We have not.
Thank you. In that case, I make the motion to approve item 2021-100, the ordinance of demolition of dwelling 810 Willis Avenue.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion made by Councilman Williams and seconded by Councilman Hudson. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none. Councilman Holmes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilman Johnson?
Aye.
Councilwoman Peters?
Aye.
Councilman Moore?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilman Williams?
Aye.
Councilman Hudson?
Aye.
Councilman Jones? Councilman Jefferson?
Aye.
The mayor votes aye. That item is approved by a vote of 9-0.
All right, next up is item 2021-101, ordinance demolition of dwelling 822 Hilltop Street.
Okay,
Turn it over
the
to Laura.
presentation is up now, so I'll just run through those pictures so you know what it looked like or looks like actually. 822 Hilltop. The inspector observed this house unsecured as well, began inspection January 1st of 2017. We held a hearing on November 5th of 2020. The reason for the difference is we had issues locating the owner. We still could not locate the owner. He did have someone that showed that had a power of attorney. It's either his wife or ex-wife, but she denied to the inspector having any such power. So we did notify her still though, but we also advertised in the paper to try and reach the owner. An order to repair or demolish was issued on November 13th of 2020 with a compliance date of December 30th of 2020. And we have not heard from anyone regarding the property other than the inspector did speak with Kimberly Jo Johnson Hoke, who's recorded as having the power of attorney. She told the inspector she didn't have it. Ms. Hoke would not advise the inspector how he could get in touch with Mr. Hoke either. And this property is delinquent with property taxes in the amount of $15,813 for 2006 through 2020.
All right, thank you, Lori. Are there any questions to staff? All right, Madam Clerk, once again, have we received any correspondence on this item?
We have not.
Thank you. In that matter, I will make a motion to approve item 2021-101 ordinance demolition of dwelling 822 Hilltop Street.
Second.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Johnson. Any discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none. Councilman Holmes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilman Johnson?
Aye.
Councilwoman Peters?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Moore?
Aye.
Councilman Williams?
Aye.
Councilman Hudson?
Aye.
Councilman Jones?
Aye.
Councilman Jefferson? And the mayor votes aye. That item is approved by 9-0 vote.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I have.
Okay. There's one item on the agenda for planning and development. It's related to a discussion we had at our last meeting regarding pursuing the introduction of a local bill in the General Assembly that would give us the authority to delegate certain planning and zoning cases to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I will go ahead and make a motion for approval of this item. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Moore. Is there any discussion on this item? I think everybody understands what we're asking for. Okay. No discussion. Councilman Holmes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Councilman Johnson?
Aye.
Councilwoman Peters?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Moore? Aye. Councilman Williams?
Aye.
Councilman Hudson?
Aye.
Councilman Jones?
Aye.
Councilman Jefferson? And the mayor votes aye. So that item is approved by a vote of 9-0. There are a couple of public hearing items tonight for a couple of zoning map amendments. Mr. Shannon, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
The first case is zoning map amendment 21-00 or 21-01. It's a request by Leo Terra Development Incorporated to rezone 20.8 acres from conditional use office institutional district to conditional zoning office institutional. This site is located on the east side of East Chester Drive, approximately 1,300 feet south of Deep River Road. I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Shannon of our planning staff for more information.
Okay. Herb Shannon, Senior Planner of the City of High Point Planning Department. And as you noted, this is a request, zoning map amendment case 2101 to rezone this 20.8 acre parcel of land from its current conditional use office institutional to a conditional zoning office institutional district. The OI district accommodates a wide variety of office and institutional uses, including healthcare, social service uses, and it also allows retail uses with some limitations on size, and permits residential uses at a maximum density of 16 units per acre. This is a blow-up of the site located along the east side of the East Chester Drive corridor south of Deep River Road. The current conditional use office institutional zoning governing the site was established in 1998. At that time, an office complex was proposed for this entire development. There is an existing office used directly to the south. That's, if you're familiar with that portion of the city, there's a 5-story, I believe, law office at that location. The development of the rest of the site for the rest of the office park never came to fruition, and that current zoning from 1998 still remains. That zoning had a condition that residential uses are prohibited. With this current application, the applicant is requesting a conditional zoning OI district, and they have asked to do a new conditional zoning ordinance. And under this ordinance, along with office uses being permitted, they've also requested that residential uses be permitted. You have in your package a conditional zoning ordinance that was submitted by the applicant, and they've offered conditions pertaining to building height. They've offered a conditional zoning plan that kind of lays the structure of how the site may develop. They've also offered landscaping conditions. I would note, since the late 1980s, this segment of the East Chester Corridor between Lassiter Drive and Hickswood Drive has had multiple parcels zoned to allow various office uses. The land use plan classifies this site for office use. This is a depiction of the land use plan for this specific area of the city, the adopted land use plan. Those areas noted in blue have a land use designation of office. The areas in yellow are low density residential that allows densities up to 5 units per acre. And the green are part of our recreation open space area. I would note this site is designated by the land use plan for office use. As part of the staff report, a traffic impact analysis was submitted. That was reviewed by the City Transportation Department. The applicant based her study on a proposal for approximately 9,000 square feet of non-residential office use and approximately 264 unit multifamily development. That report was reviewed and evaluated by the City Transportation Department. The Transportation Department and the applicant agreed that there be a condition that the site have 2 access points, a condition for 2 access points. One would be the existing access point to the southern portion of the site that's already in place, and that there would be a second access point along the East Chester corridor. A specific location wasn't noted because that's going to be based upon the specific plan that come in. But what will Transportation Department has noted that they would recommend, depending on the layout, that it be as toward the northern portion of the site, but they did not want to lock down the condition because the site could develop in many different fashions. There was also a conditional zoning plan that was submitted, and this is part of the conditional zoning ordinance, where you divide the site into 2 tracks, track A and track B. Track A lies along the East Chester Drive frontage. They've noted that only non-residential uses, office uses, other OI district uses could go there, no residential uses along the frontage. Track B can develop with any of the uses allowed in the OI district. It could be office uses, it could be personal service uses, or it could be residential uses. So that's just kind of the background of what has been submitted. Key points that staff would note from the review. First, compatibility with surrounding areas. The applicant has offered a condition to provide for building height limits and higher landscaping standards along the southern boundary of the site adjacent to the Foxwood Meadows subdivision. Currently, the abutting subdivision to the south, the zoning allows building heights up to 50 feet. The applicants offered a condition that within 75 feet of the southern boundary of the site, that the structures would be limited to a height of 50 feet. And just to note, that 75-foot distance came from, that's the approximate setback, that existing office building, which is about a 4-story office building. So just so you have a kind of a graphic idea of that 75-foot distance. As far as environmental constraints, this site is impacted by a perennial stream. This is the topography map of that area. And for those members of the public who are watching, if you're not familiar with reading a topography map, where the lines are further apart, the land's fairly level. Where the lines are close together is steeper terrain. You see along the eastern boundary of the site, there's a stream that runs from north of the site through the middle of the site. That is a perennial stream. Per the requirements of the development ordinance, there will be stream buffers required along that stream. That buffer will range between 50 feet and 100 feet along both sides of the site, depending on the intensity of the development. You can see on that east side of the site, there's not a lot of land available for development once you factor in that stream. So the applicants offered a condition that there will be no structures developed east of that stream. Also, when we look at compatibility, we looked at access issues. There are no public street networks that connect into the north or south. So access will be taken from East Chester Drive. I would also note regarding environmental impacts, development of the site is required to meet the city's watershed requirements, and to reduce soil erosion to minimize stormwater runoff. The ordinance requires a primary control measure for any development that exceeds 24% of the site. So that is a requirement of the ordinance. I would note there were a lot of questions that staff has received from the public about stormwater and so forth. And those are requirements of the development ordinance that anyone developing the site is going to be required to meet. We also took a look at would development adversely affect adjacent lands. The ordinance requires if the site develops a multifamily or its office, a type C perimeter landscape yard be installed where you have office or multifamily abutting single family. That is a 15-foot wide planting yard consisting of 7 trees and 20 shrubs every 100 linear feet. To ensure there be no adverse impacts on adjacent property owners, the applicants offered a condition that any land disturbance within 45 feet of the southern boundary of the site, that they would increase that landscaping requirements. And their condition notes that they would plant a double row of evergreen trees with a minimum insulation of 6 foot high and a minimum 6 foot high opaque fence. So if there's any grading or development within 45 feet of the southern property line, you're going to have that double row of evergreen trees and a minimum 6 foot high opaque fence installed. And to ensure long-term compatibility, the type species that they know the conditions that the type evergreen species has to be one that reaches a height of at least 25 feet at maturity. And with that double row, you're looking at approximately 20 trees every 100 linear feet. So that is a higher standard than what the development ordinance notes. Finally, we looked at the development pattern. For larger parcels along the East Chester corridor, in the past, zoning actions have supported office use along the front and multifamily to the rear. You have a similar type situation along the opposite side of this portion of East Chester Drive, where you have the Lake Point townhome development, which is a multifamily development where you have office along its frontage and multifamily to the rear. Thus, the Planning and Development Department is recommending approval of this request. As conditioned, the request will be compatible with the surrounding area and in conformance with adopted plans. The Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this application at their February public hearing and recommended approval by a vote of 9-0. And the commission stated that the request is consistent with the adopted policy guidance because the requested CZOI district is supported by the relevant goals and objectives of the land use plan and the East Chester Corridor Plan as referenced in the staff report. The commission also stated that the request is reasonable in the public interest because the requested CZOI district will enable a development pattern that is consistent with the existing land use pattern established along this segment of East Chester Drive, which is office use along the street frontage and residential uses on the remaining area of the site. As always, when council considers a conditional zoning request, you must place in the record a statement of consistency. And you have this statement that was forwarded to you from the Planning and Zoning Commission for your consideration. That is a brief summary of this request. Are there any questions of staff at this time?
Yes, this is Councilman Holmes. Ms. Shannon, I understand that in 2005, this particular piece of property came up for request for rezoning, and it was denied by both Planning and Zoning and council at the time. What significant changes have been made to allow it to be approved this time?
Well, I can just note from the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation at that time, I pulled that forwarding memo. There were a lot of comments. The main ones or key issues, members did note that it did comply with the corridor plan. Some members had concerns with access. At that time, they were just looking at one access point. There was concern that another access point should be provided. That was prior to the Deep River Road extension going in. There were efforts to try and get a connection to the north to Deep River Road, but that did not happen. There were concerns with density. There were concerns with the amount of recreational facilities that should be on the site. And there was concerns about transition of uses. Those were the comments that the Planning and Zoning Commission, I guess 16 years ago, submitted to City Council at that time.
In terms of the second access point, Has that been determined yet, or that is yet to be determined?
That will be determined once if approved, when a specific plan comes through. But there is a condition that there will be 2 access points to East Cheshire Drive.
So is that, at that point, will there be an option for the public to weigh in on where that second access point should be?
That would be a determination by the Transportation Department. It would not be a public hearing on that. That would be part of our technical review committee, and the Transportation Department will make that determination along with consultation with NCDOT, as this is a state roadway.
But the public would be able to submit their opinions on where it could be hypothetically.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Moore, a follow-up to Councilman Holmes' question. It seems like several of the comments that we've gotten were concerning the entranceway to Lake Point. I'm trying to think in my mind of any accesses along that corridor that are directly across from each other. Like, is the entranceway from the old Drexel Heritage Building, it's offlined with the one to Wyatt Early Harrison Wheeler, right?
It does not directly line up.
And is that usually the normal procedure?
I would refer to Transportation Department if you want to get into the technical issues of access and the items they would consider.
Just a yes or no question. Is that usually the normal procedure?
Typically, we try to have them line up across from one another. This property presents some issues, and they're going to have to work it out the best they can. But it's,
So you typically try to get them to line up with each other?
yes, we try to get them to line up so that they don't have a left turn conflict, but it does happen, and there's just not a whole lot we can do with it. The boundary of the site is what it is.
Yes.
So
What type of risk is that posed, hypothetically, in terms of not having these access points aligned? Does this raise the risk of potential collisions, or
yes,
significantly so?
I don't know that I would say significantly, but it does raise the risk. Anytime you have a two-way left turn lane, there is a potential for left turn conflicts, especially when driveways don't line up. And I would add that as far as public comment and as far as the public having input on where that access is, now is that opportunity. At TRC, we're going to be looking at engineering factors, and public wouldn't necessarily have a chance to comment at that point. So council has the authority to say where that access point can and cannot be. And so this is your opportunity to take a look at that and decide how you want to do that. Yes, there will be a left turn conflict with a northern access point in the vicinity of the Lake Forest Drive, Lake Forest or whatever community it is, Lake Point, excuse me. There is a potential for a left turn conflict there. There's no way, unless they add the CUOI site to the north and can work out access across that property, there is potential for conflict.
But it's not impossible to work out something.
What's currently in?
Only if the access gets moved to the north, and I don't think that's possible given the boundary of the site. Yes, sir.
This may be more for her. This is Councilman Morgan. The abutting land to the north, what's there now? Anything? Is that where that church is?
No, that the
Church
abutting
is
land to
further.
the north where it notes the CUOI in Guilford County, that is currently undeveloped.
Okay.
And I would note, just for the record, the previous request that was reviewed in 2005, it also included those 2 parcels. So it was a more dense development because it had additional land area.
Mm.
But those 2 parcels are undeveloped at this time.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff?
Can I, just for my own clarification, the reason it's going to conditional zoning is so that they can divide the area?
That allows, the conditional zoning allows applicants to offer conditions to mitigate impacts to adjacent property owners or address any other concerns.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Ms. Shannon. Okay, council will now hear from the applicant or applicant's representative.
Thank you, Mayor Wagner. I hope that you can hear me. This is Tom Carroll. I'm with the law firm Fox Rothschild. My address is 529 West Parkway in High Point. I'm joined tonight with Kai Bunker, who is the representative from Leah Terra Development, and Mr. Rich Glover with Jamestown Engineering. Mr. Glover is a veteran of these hearings and has designed many of the projects that are on this corridor. Before I begin, let me answer a question that Mr. Holmes asked. What is the difference between now and 2005? In 2005, there was one access point, basically, and there were 5 members of attorneys from the Wyatt Early law firm who came out to complain about the traffic. The project should have had a second point of access like this one does. This year, however, as we designed this site, we do have a traffic impact study that does not say, that has not identified any material danger to the public. And I think it's important to note that there are uses all up and down this corridor from Ocala Mall all the way up to Interstate 40, where we have large traffic generators on both sides of the street. We don't decide not to allow growth simply because somebody on the corridor doesn't want to have to wait. Let me go to the next slide, though, and talk about this particular one. This is not an unusual rezoning application. The only thing that makes it a little bit unusual is that we now are doing the comments by email, it seems, and then there are a lot of people who are speaking into the process who have not been part of the neighborhood meetings, even though they were invited. And we have people who are complaining about traffic on Eastchester, even though the traffic on Eastchester, for the most part, is not coming locally. As the staff has said, this is very consistent with the prevailing patterns. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is in your staff report to show you that this is the type of use that is called for. It is all blue on the land use map, so that if somebody wanted to develop this site entirely in office, it would have the exact same type of, or very similar type of traffic that would be coming and going onto East Chester Drive. I don't think, however, that there would be opposition to the exact same number of vehicles if they were coming from office buildings. I think what's really at heart here is neighbors don't want to know that multifamily could be there. It's not precisely the number of units. Let's go to the next slide. It's important to note that at least 30% of this site cannot be developed. It's probably more likely a third of the site cannot be developed. That is important for several reasons. Number one, it means that this site is very hard to develop when you have to purchase the whole site, but have to get all of your return on investment from one small part of it. You can't go in and build single family homes. Those homes would not come close to carrying the cost. It also means that when you have a site like this, you have to protect, under our land use plan, you have to protect the front part for office use, as this developer has done. And it would only be the middle section where any multifamily would be. Next slide, please. It's important to note this is classic transitional zoning. Not only do we have it elsewhere on the corridor, but this is how our own ordinance works, is how our own land use map and land use plan works, is that you have the more intense uses up along the roadway, or in this case, Eastchester, and then you would have the less intense in the middle, and then going on to single family farther away. Next slide. This is an aerial shot. It's a perfect oblong. It really needs to be a little bit wider at the bottom to accurately reflect the buffer that would be left because of that stream. I know as an illustration of the fact that a lot of people were not at these meetings but have sent you emails. You had one person from the subdivision to the right whose home is 15 to 20 feet from the next home, thinking or telling you that these apartments would be right up against them, not knowing that there would be several hundred feet of undisturbed wooded buffer. So it's important to note that those people onto the east would have the most generous buffer I've seen in a long time. Next slide. For the residents in Foxwood Meadows, it's an interesting point to know that as High Point has grown, our view of what the appropriate uses on this corridor have evolved. Today, there is no way that we would allow Foxwood Meadows to be built. There would be a requirement, just like with this site, that there would be something that would have office uses along Eastchester Drive, and then a potential for residential back behind. The homes that you see right here were built, the oldest ones were built 50 years ago this year. These homes and the residents in them have had 50 years where they have enjoyed the trees on the site to the north and have not had to have other uses, and they've had the opportunity to enjoy that. It's also important to note, though, that the distance between the homes in Foxwood Meadows is much, much closer with less of a buffer than they would have between their homes and any building that would be on the Natuzzi site. Next slide, please. And as an example, there is no home in Foxwood Meadows where you would have 6-foot opaque fences and 2 rows of evergreens between the homes. Now, so everybody who lives there has become accustomed to living next to other people without this. On the other hand, Leah Terra has offered this as a screening, as a buffer to separate the uses. This is much higher than is required by the zoning ordinance, and it's something that the Planning and Zoning Commission noted when they recommended it to you unanimously. Next slide, please. On stormwater, stormwater has not been as much of an issue this time as it was in 2005, but I go out of my way to make sure I say stormwater is not a land use issue. It's an engineering issue that's determined by engineering principles and calculations of water flow over land. In this particular case, there would be stormwater ponds that capture the water that flows across the site and slowly release it so that the amount of water that leaves this site now, pre-development, equals the amount of water that leaves the site post-development. That's how the city of High Point and the state of North Carolina standards work. Next slide, please. Let's talk about traffic for a second. You know, every time we have a development, it's tempting to look at traffic as all created by the uses on adjoining properties, but that's not the case. In this case, most of the traffic on Eastchester is traffic that starts in High Point or ends in High Point and is going to Greensboro or out toward the airport. This happens to be in the middle of the place where a lot of people are commuting to their jobs or to shop or other places that are north or northeast of High Point. So this is from the traffic study. We farmed this out to experts. They used the most sophisticated software in the world. This is the exact same software that NCDOT would use, same software that High Point would use if it were doing a traffic study. And they have calculated that the increase in traffic at the light that's just north of this is less than a second in the AM and 1.1 second in the PM. So that's the big picture. Let's go to the next slide. I put this in here because it's important to show you that the level of service, eastbound, westbound, northbound, southbound, remains the same, whether it is build or no build. So that's the amount of traffic delay is important to note. Levels of service, I think you probably see if you read these transportation studies, are the measures of the amount of time that you are sitting at a light. Next slide, please. Now, if you're sitting at one of these places, like the Wyatt Early law firm, as one example, it does take a little bit of time to come out. 20 years ago, I was a partner in that law firm. I have been there many times since then, but it's one of the many uses and places on Eastchester. There is not a single place on the Eastchester corridor where when you're coming out of a drive or an entrance road from a subdivision that you don't have to wait just a little bit. You try to minimize that if you can, but it doesn't mean that you stop the growth in our city because of that. Next slide. This is the second point of access. This is here because the transportation staff said we had to have a second point of access. This is actually, it's a very good and wise thing to do. The place where it is might actually move a slight bit. The property owner to the north has met with us and they have said they have no problem with the rezoning, but they would like for this driveway actually to straddle the property lines. This is a TRC issue. It's not a public comment issue because you go by transportation safety principles, and those principles do require that it's safer to have the driveways line up. We did have our meeting with Lake Point was only a few days ago. That's because we sent our letter to the property address for the HOA that was with Guilford County GIS. It's the same address the city used, but they switched management companies and didn't tell anybody. So we ended up having to put something in there at the last minute to give them an update. Lake Point, it's important to note, could not be built today, period. It was built prior to the Water Supply Watershed Protection Act of 1989. So they are grandfathered, and I know that you have received, I've read every one of them, that they don't like having to wait coming in or out of their of Lake Point where they live. And we get that, and we don't want them to have to wait. But the fact is, when you move to the busiest corridor in the city, you do expect to know that there's going to be a little bit of delay coming and going. The final point I would like to make, we have met with Wyatt Early. The primary point that we discussed with them was that we're going to try to save some buffers, and that for especially the third and fourth floors, that's where the offices are. We want to do everything we can. The problem is the Natuzzi property goes down to their pond. We didn't know that originally, but we're still going to try to arrange a building so that the row of trees would remain to shield the trees. And if we can't, we're going to offer, just like we do for the folks in Foxwood, something that's much higher than is required, and that's in the conditions that's required. I'm pleased to answer any questions that council members might have.
Yeah, this is Councilman Moore. Tom, so staff and then your report states that on a road of this type, that studies tell us it is better to have the driveways directly across from each other?
That's correct.
And your past history with White Early Harris Building, do you happen to, this is just off the cuff, do you happen to know the square footage of that building?
I don't, but it pales when you compare to what could be built in terms of future office on the Natuzzi site if everything went office.
I believe I was just doing that for comparison purposes and also for us and anybody that might be listening. The staff report stated that there's a proposed possibility of 9,000 square feet of retail space. Is that correct?
No,
I'm
office.
sorry, office space.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's a guess as to what could exist on the acreage along the front. It depends on how tall the buildings would be, how you can arrange the parking. And also, you could also have office use that bleeds back into the area that's shown as having multifamily. The conditions are written so that Tract A has to be office and cannot be residential, but Tract B could be residential. I'm sorry, could be office.
Right. Okay. And one reiteration point, the piece near the retention pond and between Foxwood and Meadows is going to have several hundred feet of natural barrier?
No, it's the Sunset Hollow subdivision to the east is what will have several hundred feet. But if you look at what's in front of you right now, there are 3 cul-de-sacs in Foxwood Meadows. The cul-de-sac that's farthest to the east is the one that would be shielded by the natural trees because there won't be any development near those homes because of that stream.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Councilman Holmes. So we're talking about just over six acres of this tract that won't ever be developed. You said about a third of it.
That would be approximately right. Yes, it would be. I mean, that's not an exact number, but it's approximately a third.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Council will continue to accept public comment on this item and choose to take final action on it at our meeting on Wednesday, March 17th, 5:30. If you'd like to submit comments, you can do it by email, public comment at topography.gov. You can submit them by phone, 336-883. What's the rest of that number? 3111.
3522.
336.
3522.
3522. Okay. I need to write that on my little cheat sheet up there.
Be on there.
Or you can put it in either of the utility drop boxes on the north or south side of City Hall if you have a comment. Again, council may take action on it at our 5:30 meeting this Wednesday. Next item on the agenda is another zoning map amendment, zoning map 1-02. This is a request by True to rezone approximately 39.5 acres from residential single family 3, that's R3 district, to conditional zoning residential single family 5, C3 R5. The site is located south of Quail Run Drive at the southern terminus of Derby Court Duke's Hollow Court, and William Joseph Lane. Again,
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Herb Shannon, Senior Planner, City of High Point Planning Department. This is a staff presentation for zoning map amendment 2102. The mayor has noted the location and the applicant's request to rezone from the current R3 to a conditional zoning R5 district. This is a larger map of the city and where the site is situated. This is a blow up, and you can see the site does abut the I-74 corridor. To the east or to the right, you see a Deep River Road. Kind of also to the east and north is Gordon Road. And this site abuts the existing Quail Run Farm subdivision. And there are 3 stub streets that stub into the site. This property is impacted by multiple physical constraints. This is a topographical map of that area. I always like to point out for the public who are not familiar looking at these maps where the lines are further apart, fairly level, where the lines are close together, steeper terrain, and you have several streams that impact the site. You have a perennial stream that runs along the southern boundary of the site and a perennial stream that goes northward into the site. And the steeper topography is along these stream corridors. That stream to the south, those areas highlighted in gray, those are the floodway, the 100 and 500 year flood zone areas along the southern boundary of the site. Finally, there's a City of High Point electrical transmission easement that runs through the middle of the site. Where you see that text site, that's the approximate location where there's a 50-foot wide electrical transmission easement. So because of the topography, the impacts by streams, the electrical easement, the applicants are requesting rezoning to a conditional zoning residential single-family 5 district to allow for increased flexibility as far as lot sizes as they work around the several environmental constraints on the site. The applicant has offered a conditional zoning ordinance in which they've offered to limit the site to 80 dwelling units. That's a density of 2 units per acre. As far as potential traffic impacts, the Transportation Department did evaluate this proposal. A traffic impact analysis was not required as the development would not generate more than 150 trips within the peak hours. But there would be stub streets to the north. You see Derby Circle. There's also William Joseph Lane and Duke's Hollow Court that stub into the site. And those roadways would be extended to provide multiple access points in and out to this development. Key points that staff would note as far as compatibility with the surrounding area, the abutting residential developments to the north and east were developed under the former development ordinance that allows single-family detached dwellings at a density of 3 units per acre. With the condition offered by the applicant, this development of this site, as they've conditioned it, could not exceed 80 units or 2 units per acre. As far as environmental impacts, this site is required to meet the city's watershed standards of development ordinance, stream buffer standards, depending on the intensity of development. A 50-foot or 100-foot wide buffer is required along both sides of all streams, classified streams impacting the site. And finally, as far as the difference between the 2 districts is basically the R5 allows up to 5 units per acre, smaller lot size, the R3 up to 3 units per acre. But as conditioned, you will have a compatible development. The existing land that's developed out there in the budding Quail Run development has a density of 2.4 units per acre. As conditioned, this site could not exceed 2 units per acre. So it would be a compatible density that's been as established in this area. Therefore, the Planning and Development Department is recommending approval to rezone this site to a conditional zoning R5 district. The Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this request at their February public hearing and recommend approval by a vote of 9-0. The commission stated that the request is consistent with adopted policy guidance because the requested CZ R5 district is supported by the low density residential land use classification of the adopted land use plan. And the commission also stated that the request is reasonable and in the public interest because the requested CZ R5 district, along with the physical constraints of the zoning site, will produce a residential development with a density similar to the surrounding area. That is a brief summary. Are there any questions of staff at this time?
Anyone? Thank you, Mr. Shannon. The council will now hear from the applicant.
This is Judy Stalder, 3735 Admiral Drive. And also online to answer your questions is Jeff Gurnier from True Homes. You can gather from Mr. Shannon's presentation that this is a challenging site. There's steep topography and large areas of environmentally sensitive wetlands and waterways. And to protect those areas, True Homes is asking for a conditional R5 zoning to allow some flexibility on the lot size. So although the request is from R3 to R5, the density is not increasing. In fact, the condition caps the zoning at 2 units per acre. The R5 allows us to adjust the lot size to stay out of the environmentally sensitive areas. The homes will still be comparable in value to those in the adjacent neighborhood because smaller lots do not mean less valuable homes. And the abundance of open space makes up for the smaller size. We had a Zoom meeting for the neighbors and 1 neighbor attended. Since then, I've answered questions for 2 more neighbors. And I also contacted the neighbors that submitted public comments. Mr. Yoakley from the Audubon Townhomes was unclear about the location of the property. And he now understands that this development has no impact on the Audubon Townhomes that are located across the creek and down the road a ways from this property. The Johnsons also submitted comments. They just don't want to see an increase in density. And just to say it one more time, we are actually reducing the allowable density with this request. And the Johnson's daughter was the 1 neighbor that attended our Zoom meeting. A TIA was not required because the number of homes did not meet the threshold specified by the ordinance. The property is bounded by Interstate 74 and Boulding Branch, so there just isn't another way to access this property. And the site plan was reviewed by TRC, and we incorporated their comments in our site plan. In conclusion, we ask for your approval tonight because the proposed plan allows a practical and efficient way to use this property that's in harmony with the existing neighborhood and protects the environmentally sensitive areas here. Thank you.
Anyone have questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you, Ms. Stalder. Again, this is an item that council will continue to receive comments on for a period of 24 hours and may take action on at our meeting on Wednesday, 17th at 5:30. I'll repeat again, if you want to make comments on this, we can receive them at public comment at highpointnc.gov. You can call them in 336-883-3522, or you can drop them at the utility boxes on the north side or south side of City Hall. Okay, that is it then for the planning and development portion of the agenda. On our general business agenda, we really only have 1 item, and that's some minutes to be approved. There's been a motion to approve by the Mayor Pro Tem and seconded by Councilman Jones. Anyone with any changes to the minutes? Okay. Hearing none, is there anyone opposed to approval of the minutes? Okay, then the minutes will stand approved as submitted by a vote of 9-0. And anyone have anything they'd like to announce before we consider a motion to adjourn?
Congratulations to the High Point University women's basketball Big South champions. Good luck in the tournament.
I think it's their first trip
First
to
trip
the big dance.
Wow.
Big time.
That's right. So everybody tune in and cheer for the Panthers. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I moved.
Our motion's been made by Councilwoman Peters.
Adjourn, do we?
What's that?
Adjourn, do we? Adjourn.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's right.
So you withdraw your motion to adjourn. Y'all are confusing me by putting this adjournment thing on the schedule. All right. I will declare this meeting to be in recess until Wednesday, March 17th at 5:30 PM, when we'll reconvene. Thank you.